The engine sputtered, coughed, and died, leaving only the hum of cicadas and the vast, empty stretch of Arizona desert. I was 22, fresh out of college, and stranded on a road trip with Caleb, my dad's best friend, a man I barely knew but couldn't stop watching. By the time the tow truck driver told us we'd be stuck in a nowhere town for days, my heart was already racing, not from the breakdown, but from the way Caleb's steady gaze held mine, like he saw something in me I hadn't dared to name. I'd always known I was different. Growing up in suburban Phoenix, I had the part of me that lingered too long on the quarterback's smile or felt a jolt when a guy's hand brushed mine. My dad, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a laugh that filled a room, never suspected her if he did. He never said. Caleb, though, was different. He'd been around since I was a kid, always at our barbecues, fixing cars with Dad, his broad shoulders and easy grin a quiet constant in my life. Now, at 45, he was still magnetic, with a rugged charm that made my chest tighten every time he spoke my name. This trip wasn't my idea. Dad insisted I join Caleb on his cross-country drive to deliver a vintage Mustang to a buyer in California. It'll be good for you, Ethan, Dad had said, clapping my shoulder. Get out of your head. See the world. I didn't argue I never did, but I wasn't prepared for how Caleb's presence would unravel me. The car broke down on day 2, somewhere between nowhere and nothing. And now we were stuck in a dusty motel with 1 room, 2 beds, and attention I couldn't name. Caleb tossed his duffel bag onto the bed nearest the window, his flannel shirt stretching across his back as he moved. Not exactly the Ritz, he said, his voice low and warm, but we'll make do. I nodded, my throat dry, hyper-aware of the space between us. The room smelled of old carpet and faint bleach, but all I could focus on was the way his hazel eyes caught the dim light, like they held a secret. I sat on the edge of my bed, picking at a loose thread on my jeans. You think the car will be fixed soon? I asked, more to fill the silence than anything else. Caleb shrugged, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. Mechanic said a couple days. Parts gotta come from Tucson. He paused, studying me. You okay, Ethan? You've been quiet. Quiet. That was one way to put it. My whole life, I'd been quiet, hiding who I was, what I felt, because it was safer that way. But sitting there, with Caleb's steady gaze on me, I felt exposed, like he could see the truth I'd buried. I'm fine, I lied, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't push, but he didn't look away either. Instead, he grabbed a couple of beers from the mini fridge and handed me one. To surviving the desert, he said, clinking his bottle against mine. His smile was soft, disarming, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. That night, as the desert wind howled outside, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Caleb's breathing was steady across the room, each exhale a reminder of his presence. I'd spent years convincing myself I could ignore these feelings, that I could be the son my dad wanted, straight, simple, safe. But Caleb was dismantling that lie without even trying. Every glance, every casual touch, felt like a question I wasn't ready to answer. The next morning, we wandered into the town's only diner, a retro joint with chipped Formica tables and a jukebox that played Johnny Cash. Caleb ordered pancakes, and I got eggs, but the food was just an excuse to sit across from him, to watch the way his hands moved, strong and sure, as he cut into his stack. You ever think about what you want, Ethan? He asked suddenly, his fork pausing midair. I froze, my heart thudding. What do you mean? Life. Dreams. The whole deal. His eyes locked onto mine, and I swear the diner faded away, leaving just us. You're young. Got the world in front of you. What's calling you? I wanted to say something profound, Something that would make him see me as more than his friend's kid. But all I managed was, I don't know. I'm still figuring it out. It was the truth, but it felt like a cop-out. Caleb leaned back, his expression unreadable. Fair enough. Just don't wait too long to figure out who you are. His words hit like a punch, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I was hiding, and he knew it. That afternoon, we walked the town's main street, a stretch of faded storefronts and cracked sidewalks. Caleb pointed out a vintage record store, and we spent an hour flipping through vinyl, laughing over cheesy album covers. His arm brushed mine as we reached for the same record, and the contact sent a jolt through me. I pulled back, my face hot, but he just smiled, like he hadn't noticed. Or maybe he had. By the time we got back to the motel, the sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery streaks. Caleb sat on the hood of the broken-down Mustang, staring out at the horizon. You ever feel like you're running from something? He asked, his voice quiet. I climbed up beside him, our shoulders inches apart. Yeah, I admitted. All the time. He turned to me, his face close enough that I could see the faint lines around his eyes, the weight of years I didn't yet understand. You don't have to run forever, Ethan, he said. Sometimes, you just gotta stop and face it. I wanted to ask what he meant, to spill everything I'd kept locked inside. But the words stuck in my throat, and all I could do was nod. As the stars began to speckle the sky, I realized this trip wasn't just about a car or a destination. It was about me, about Caleb, and about the truth I was too scared to face. The desert morning was brutal, the sun already searing by 8 a.m. Caleb and I sat on the motel's cracked patio, sipping weak coffee from styrofoam cups. His flannel was unbuttoned, revealing a glimpse of tan skin that made my pulse stutter. I looked away, pretending to study the horizon, but my mind was on him and the way his laugh lines deepened when he smiled, on the quiet strength in his voice when he spoke about life. We spent the day exploring the town, a place frozen in time with its neon signs and faded murals. Caleb had a way of making everything feel alive, pointing out details I'd never noticed, like the way the light hit a rusted gas pump, turning it into art. You've got an artist's eye, I said, half joking, as we stood outside a crumbling theater. He chuckled, nudging my shoulder. And you've got a poet's heart, kid. Don't think I haven't noticed. His words landed like a spark, igniting something I couldn't name. I wanted to ask what he saw in me, but fear kept me silent. Instead, I followed him into a thrift store, where he tried on a ridiculous cowboy hat, tipping it at me with a grin that made my knees weak. That night, the motel's air conditioner rattled like it was on its last breath. Caleb sprawled on his bed, reading a dog-eared paperback, while I pretended to scroll on my phone. The silence between us was heavy, charged with things unsaid. I kept replaying his words from the day before. Don't wait too long to figure out who you are. Did he know? Had he seen the way I looked at him? The way my breath caught when he stood too close? You're thinking loud enough to wake the dead, Caleb said, setting his book down. He propped himself on one elbow, his gaze piercing. Want to share? I swallowed hard, my heart hammering. Just wondering what happens when we get back. You know, to real life. He studied me for a long moment, like he was weighing his words. Real life's what you make it, Ethan. You can keep running, or you can choose to live. His voice was soft but firm, and it felt like he was talking about more than just the trip. I wanted to tell him everything: how I'd spent years hiding, how I'd dated girls to fit in, how every time I saw him, I felt like I was drowning and flying at the same time. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I mumbled, "I'm trying," and turned away, pretending to sleep. The next day, the mechanic called. The part was delayed, Another day at least. Caleb didn't seem fazed, suggesting we hike a nearby trail to kill time. The desert stretched endlessly before us, all red rock and stubborn scrub. He walked ahead, his stride confident, and I followed, my eyes tracing the lines of his back. At the top of a ridge, we stopped, the view stealing my brain of the sea of sand and stone under a sky too big to comprehend. Caleb handed me a water bottle, his fingers brushing mine. "You ever been in love, Ethan?" he asked, out of nowhere. The question hit like a freight train. I stammered. Don't know. Maybe not. You. He looked out at the desert, his jaw tight. Once. A long time ago. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push, but the weight of his words hung between us. I wondered who he'd loved, what had happened, and why it felt like he was telling me something vital. That night, we ended up at a dive bar, the kind with sticky floors and a bartender who looked like he'd seen it all. Caleb ordered whiskey, and I stuck to soda, feeling out of place but tethered by his presence. A slow song came on, and a few couples swayed on the makeshift dance floor. I watched them, a pang in my chest, wishing I could be that free. "You want to dance?" Caleb asked, his tone teasing but his eyes serious. I laughed, nervous. "With who?" "You." He raised an eyebrow, leaning closer. "Why not?" My heart stopped. Was he joking? Flirting? I couldn't tell, but the idea of dancing with him, even as a joke, made my head spin. "I'm good," I said, my voice shaky, and he let it drop. But the moment lingered, electric and unresolved. As we walked back to the motel under a blanket of stars, I felt the weight of my silence. I was falling for him, and it terrified me. Caleb wasn't just my dad's friend, was a man who'd lived, who'd loved, who'd lost. What could he possibly see in me? The desert heat was relentless, but it was nothing compared to the fire building inside me. Caleb and I were stuck in this nowhere town, and every moment with him felt like a test I was failing. I wanted to be honest, to tell him I was gay, that I was falling for him, but the fear of his rejection or worse, his pity kept me silent. We spent the morning at the garage, watching the mechanic tinker with the Mustang. Caleb leaned against the car, arms crossed, his ease making the gritty shop feel like a stage. "You ever worked on a car?" he asked, tossing me a rag. "A little," I said, though I'd only ever watched Dad. He handed me a wrench, guiding my hands to a bolt, his touch steady and warm. "Like this," he said, his voice close to my ear. My skin prickled, and I fumbled the wrench, earning a chuckle from him. "You're a quick learner," he said, and I wanted to believe he meant more than just the car. We worked side by side, the rhythm of it calming my nerves, but every brush of his arm against mine sent my heart into overdrive. That afternoon, we found a small park, just a patch of grass with a creaky swing set. Caleb sat on one swing, his long legs stretched out, and I took the other. The silence was comfortable, but my mind was a storm. I kept thinking about his question about love, about the way he'd looked at me in the bar. Was I imagining the spark in his eyes, or was it real? "You're quiet again," he said, his swing creaking. "What's going on in that head of yours?" I gripped the chains of the swing, my knuckles white. "Just thinking about who I am. Like you said." My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. He stopped swinging, turning to face me. "And what do you see?" I couldn't meet his eyes. Someone who's scared. Someone who doesn't know how to be himself. It was the closest I'd come to saying it, and my heart pounded so loud I thought he'd hear it. Caleb didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, his gaze soft but intense. "Being yourself is the hardest thing, Ethan. But it's worth it. Trust me." There was a weight to his words, a story he wasn't telling, and I wanted to ask, but I didn't. That night, we sat on the motel's roof, a spot we'd found with a view of the desert stars. Caleb brought a blanket, and we shared it, our shoulders touching. The cold bit at my fingers, but his warmth kept me grounded. You ever feel like the world's too big? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. All the time, he said. But sometimes, it's the small moments that make it bearable. He turned to me, his face inches from mine, and for a second, I thought he might kiss me. My breath caught, but he just smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and looked back at the stars. The next day, the mechanic called. The part was in, and the car would be ready by morning. Relief warred with disappointment in my chest. This strange, suspended moment with Caleb was ending. I didn't want to go back to pretending, to hiding. But what choice did I have? We spent our last evening in the diner, sharing a plate of fries. Caleb told stories about his 20s, about road trips and bad decisions, and I hung on every word, trying to memorize the sound of his voice. When he laughed, it was like the world lit up, and I realized I wasn't just falling, I was in love. As we walked back to the motel, he stopped under a streetlight, his face half-shadowed. "Ethan," he said, his voice serious, "whatever you're carrying, you don't have to carry it alone." His hand grazed mine, and I froze, my heart in my throat. Was this it? Was this the moment I'd been waiting for? But before I could speak, a car honked, shattering the moment. Caleb stepped back, his expression unreadable, and we walked on in silence. That night, I lay awake, replaying his words, his touch, and the truth I was too scared to face. Tomorrow, we'd be back on the road, but I wasn't sure I'd ever be the same. The Mustang roared to life the next morning, its engine a low growl that broke the desert's silence. Caleb slid into the driver's seat, his hands steady on the wheel, while I sat shotgun, my duffel bag at my feet and my heart in knots. We were moving again, but I felt like I was leaving something behind, something I hadn't even fully grasped. The road stretched ahead, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through endless sand. Caleb turned on the radio, some classic rock station, but the music was just noise. My mind was on last night, on the way his hand had brushed mine, on the words he'd said, "You don't have to carry it alone." Did he know how much I wanted to tell him? Did he feel it too? "You're quiet again," Caleb said, glancing at me. "Miss the motel life already?" I forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. Just thinking about what's next. It was half true. I was thinking about California, about the end of this trip, about going back to a life where I'd have to hide again. He nodded, his eyes on the road. End of a trip's always bittersweet. You learn a lot about yourself on the way. His voice was casual, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing me. I wanted to scream that I'd learned too much, that I was in love with him, that I was gay, that I was terrified of what that meant. But instead, I said, "Yeah, I guess so." We stopped at a gas station, a rundown place with a single pump and a flickering neon sign. Caleb filled the tank while I grabbed snacks inside, my hands shaking as I paid. When I came out, he was leaning against the car, the sun glinting off his hair. "You okay, Ethan?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I'm fine," I lied, but my voice cracked, betraying me. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I thought he'd push, that he'd make me say it. But he just nodded and got back in the car. The rest of the day was a blur of desert and small talk. Caleb told stories about his old job's construction, bartending, even a stint as a park ranger. I listened, hanging on every word, but my mind kept drifting to the what-ifs. What if I told him? What if he felt the same? What if he didn't? That night, we stopped at a campsite, the kind with fire pits and starry skies. Caleb built a fire, his hands deft and sure, and we sat on a log, the flames casting shadows on his face. "You ever think about the past?" he asked, poking the fire with a stick. "Sometimes," I said, "but I'm more worried about the future." He looked at me, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "The future's not so scary if you know who you are." His words hit hard, and I felt the weight of my silence pressing down. "Caleb," I started, my voice barely audible. What if who I am isn't what people expect?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me, his expression soft but intense, like he was seeing straight through me. "Then you find the people who love you for it," he said finally. "The real ones always will." My throat tightened, and I looked away, blinking back tears. I wanted to tell him he was one of those people, that he was the only one who made me feel like I could be myself. But the words stayed locked inside, and the moment slipped away. As we sat by the fire, the desert night closing in, I realized this trip was changing me. Caleb was changing me. He wasn't just my dad's friend anymore, was the man who made me want to be brave, to be honest, to be me. But with every mile we drove, the end of the trip loomed closer, and I wasn't sure I'd have the courage to face the truth before it was over. The road to California felt like a countdown. Every mile marker was a reminder that this strange, electric time with Caleb was running out. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the desert give way to rolling hills, my heart a tangled mess of hope and fear. Caleb was quieter today, his usual easy banter replaced by a thoughtful silence. I caught him glancing at me, his hazel eyes unreadable, and each look sent a jolt through me. I wanted to ask what he was thinking, but I was too scared of the answer. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, the kind with vinyl booths and a waitress who called everyone Han. Caleb ordered a burger, and I got a milkshake, but the food was just a distraction. My mind was on him and the way his hands gripped the steering wheel, on the way his voice softened when he said my name. "You ever gonna tell me what's eating you?" he asked, dipping a fry in ketchup. His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. I froze, my straw halfway to my mouth. "What do you mean?" "You've been carrying something heavy this whole trip," he said. "I can see it. You don't have to tell me. But I'm here." His voice was so gentle it broke something in me. I wanted to tell him everything, how I'd known I was gay since I was 15, how I'd hidden it from everyone, how being near him made me feel alive and terrified all at once. But the words stuck, and all I managed was, "It's complicated." He nodded, like he understood, and didn't push. But as we left the diner, his hand brushed my back, a fleeting touch that felt like a promise. I clung to it, even as doubt gnawed at me. What if I was reading him wrong? What if he was just being kind? That evening, we reached a small coastal town, the air salty and cool. The Mustang was due to the buyer in the morning, but Caleb suggested we spend the night at a beachside motel. "One last night on the road," he said, his smile bittersweet. The motel room overlooked the ocean, waves crashing softly in the distance. Caleb stood on the balcony, his silhouette framed against the twilight. I joined him, my heart pounding. The air between us was charged, like a storm about to break. "You've been good company, Ethan," he said, his voice low. "Better than I expected." I laughed, nervous. "You thought I'd be a pain." "Nah," he said, turning to face me. "I just didn't expect this." He gestured between us, and my breath caught. What did he mean? Before I could ask, he stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. "You're not a kid anymore, are you?" My heart stopped. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." For a moment, we just stood there, The ocean's rhythm, the only sound. Then he reached out, his hand cupping my face, his thumb brushing my cheek. "Ethan," he said, and the way he said my name was a question, a confession, a plea. I leaned into his touch, my eyes closing, and then his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, like he was giving me a chance to pull away. But I didn't. I kissed him back, my hands clutching his shirt, the world falling away until it was just us. Just this. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath ragged. "I shouldn't have done that," he said, but his hand stayed on me, grounding me. "Why not?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Because you're young. Because you're my friend's kid. Because," he trailed off, his eyes searching mine. "Because I don't know if I can stop." "Then don't," I said, and I kissed him again, harder this time, pouring everything I'd held back into it. The kiss was fire and freedom, and for the first time, I wasn't hiding. The kiss changed everything. Caleb's hands were warm on my face, his breath mingling with mine as the ocean roared below. I'd spent years dreaming of a moment like this, but the reality was overwhelming, terrifying, and perfect all at once. We stumbled back into the motel room, the door clicking shut behind us. Caleb pulled away, his eyes searching mine. "Ethan, we need to talk about this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. It's complicated." "I don't care," I said, my voice fiercer than I felt. "I've wanted you for so long." The confession spilled out, raw and unfiltered, and I braced for rejection. But Caleb didn't pull away. He sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "You don't know what you're saying," he said, but there was no conviction in it. "I'm too old for you. Your dad." "Forget my dad," I interrupted, stepping closer. "This is about us. About me. I'm not a kid. Caleb. I know what I want." He looked up at me, his expression torn. "And what happens when this trip ends? When we go back to real life?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know I can't go back to hiding. Not after this." My voice cracked, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded. But I couldn't stop. "I'm gay, Caleb. I've always been. And you're the first person who's made me feel like that's okay." His eyes softened, and he stood, pulling me into a hug. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper, a promise of safety. "You're more than okay, Ethan," he whispered. "You're incredible." We stayed like that for a long time, his arms around me, my face buried in his shoulder. When we finally pulled apart, he kissed me again, slower this time, like he was memorizing me. We didn't sleep together that night, not like that. We just lay on the bed, talking, our hands entwined. He told me about his past, about a man he'd loved in his 20s, a relationship he'd kept secret because the world wasn't ready. I told him about my fear, my shame, my hope. The next morning, we delivered the Mustang to the buyer, a quiet transaction that felt like the end of something. Caleb was subdued, his usual confidence dimmed. As we drove back toward Phoenix in a rental car, the silence between us was heavy. I wanted to ask what we were now, what this meant, but I was afraid of the answer. We stopped at a rest area, the sun setting over the mountains. Caleb leaned against the car, his eyes distant. "I don't know how to do this, Ethan," he said. "I don't know how to be what you need." "You already are," I said, stepping closer. "You make me feel like I can be myself. Isn't that enough?" He smiled, but it was sad. "For now, maybe. But you've got a whole life ahead of you. I don't want to hold you back." "You're not," I insisted, but doubt crept in. What if he was right? What if this was just a moment, a fleeting spark that couldn't survive the real world? That night, we stayed in another motel, but the magic of the previous night was gone. Caleb was distant, his touches hesitant. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake. Had I pushed too hard? Had I ruined everything? The drive back to Phoenix was a slow unraveling. Caleb's hands gripped the wheel, his jaw tight, and I sat beside him, my heart sinking with every mile. The kiss, the confession, the night we'd spent bearing our soulset felt like a dream now, fading in the harsh light of day. I tried to make conversation, but Caleb's responses were short, his eyes fixed on the road. "You okay?" I asked finally, unable to stand the silence. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. "Just thinking," he said, "about what happens next." My stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" He sighed, pulling over to a scenic overlook. The desert stretched out below, vast and unforgiving. "Ethan, what we did, it was real. But it's not simple. Your dad, my life, our age difference eats a lot." "I don't care about that," I said, my voice rising. "I love you, Caleb. Doesn't that matter?" His eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. But then he reached for my hand, his grip tight. "You don't know how much that means," he said. "But love isn't always enough. Not when the world's involved." I pulled my hand away, anger flaring. "So what? We just pretend it never happened. Go back to being, what? Friends?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I just know I can't hurt you. Or your dad." The mention of my dad was a gut punch. I hadn't thought about him. Not really. Not in the context of this. What would he say if he knew? Would he hate me? Hate Caleb? The thought made me feel sick. We drove on, the silence heavier now. When we stopped for gas, I wandered to the edge of the lot, staring at the horizon. Caleb joined me, his presence a comfort and a wound. "I'm scared too, Ethan," he said quietly. "I've spent years hiding who I am. But you make me want to stop." "Then why are you pulling away?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Because I'm trying to protect you," he said. "You deserve a life where you don't have to hide, where you can love openly, without losing anyone." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But deep down, I knew he was right. My dad, my family, my friends, they were part of the life I'd built. Could I risk losing them for this? That night, we stayed in a cheap motel, the last one before Phoenix. Caleb didn't touch me, didn't kiss me, but he stayed close, his presence a quiet anchor. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep hiding, keep pretending, or I could be brave for me, for Caleb, for the life I wanted. Phoenix loomed on the horizon, a sprawl of lights that felt like the end of everything. Caleb drove in silence, his hands steady but his eyes distant. I wanted to reach for him, to hold on to the man who'd changed me, but fear kept me still. We pulled into my dad's driveway at dusk, the familiar sight of his garage a stark reminder of reality. Caleb cut the engine, and for a moment, we just sat there, the weight of the trip settling between us. "We're here," he said, his voice low. "Yeah," I said, my throat tight. "What now?" He turned to me, his eyes soft but resolute. "You live, Ethan. You be you. And you don't let anyone make you feel less for it." Tears stung my eyes, but I blinked them back. "And you? What about us?" He smiled, a sad, beautiful smile. "I'll always be here. But you need to find your own path first." I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay, but I knew he was right. This wasn't the end, but it wasn't the beginning either. It was a steep, a painful, necessary step toward being myself. We got out of the car, and my dad came out, his grin wide. "You boys survived the road?" he asked, clapping Caleb on the back. "Barely," Caleb said, his laugh masking the truth. I forced a smile, my heart breaking as I watched him play the part of the old friend. That night, I sat in my room, staring at the ceiling. The trip had changed me, had shown me who I could be. I wasn't ready to tell my dad. Not yet, but I knew I would. And when I did, I'd think of Caleb, his strength, his honesty, his love. A week later, I got a text from Caleb. Just 2 words, "Be brave." I smiled, tears falling, and typed back, "I will." I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I'd carry him with me. A reminder that love was worth the risk. And one day, when I was ready, I'd find him again, not as my dad's friend, but as the man who'd shown me how to live.